Family Affair is the 7th episode of the 2nd season of The Golden Girls. This is directed by Terry Hughes, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I talk about what happens in this episode. And this one tackles an interesting topic with a lot of different perspectives. Basically, everybody involved in this story has a different perspective, and it really helps to show the different sides. And I think we have some really, really great discussions. It starts off with Sophia eating food that Rose had laid out for her daughter's arrival. Apparently the cheese had been moulded into the shape of little clogs. Absolutely adorable. Blanche then comes in and unfortunately her back's gone out, so she's hobbling quite a bit in this episode. And then within the same scene, Dorothy's son Michael arrives. And then very shortly after, Rose's daughter Bridget arrives. It's a very busy opening scene and it establishes everything immediately. Very, very well done. And Blanche and Dorothy and Sophia are in the kitchen together. Michael comes down and Dorothy gives him money to take Sophia out to see The Journey of Natty Gann. By tremendous coincidence, I watched that film for the first time, either last week or the week before. Pretty good, definitely recommend it. And then for a moment it's just Blanche and Dorothy, and then Rose comes in. We do have a lot of people coming and going in this episode. It feels quite busy, not in a negative way, just there's always something going on. There's always somebody moving around the house. And Rose and Bridget had spent the morning together. They definitely seem very alike. Bridget seems a lot like her mother. Dorothy indicates that Michael is maybe not the person she'd want him to be. She still loves him. There is no suggestion against that. But he's maybe not settling down as much. He's, I think she said 29. He is a musician and he has creative differences with people, so he's never really holding down a job. They're not seemingly getting on as well as Rose and Bridget. And Blanche suggests that the kids should just go out together and maybe Bridget would be a positive influence on Michael, which seems like a pretty sensible suggestion. But Rose and Dorothy both say no, and I think that that's a fair response. I don't think many people would want their child to be going out with their friend's child because it could just end in disaster. We then end this scene with a delightful bit of comedy because Rose is apparently going to the felt sale later on and she's worried she's going to get a little bit overexcited. Dorothy tells her she should probably take a tranquilizer so she doesn't pass out, and Rose tells her she won't pass out. When she passed out before, it was a world of wool. Absolutely adorable. A nice little light-hearted way to end that scene. We then have a scene immediately after with Dorothy, Blanche and Sophia. They're all talking about signs when they started to realise they were getting older. This, of course, is in relation to Blanche having hurt her back. And I think that that's a really important topic that pretty much no other sitcom addresses, certainly not as abundantly as The Golden Girls. It is something that they tackle quite a lot, and I think it's one of the reasons why the show works so well, because they are addressing something that most other shows don't, and they're just addressing it in passing here. Whereas if another sitcom were to address aging, it would be a whole episode. For example, there's an episode of Cheers where Sam starts to realise he's getting older, and that's basically the whole episode. Whereas here we just have little passing comments, making it normal, part of everyday life and everyday conversation, and I absolutely love it. In the same scene, Blanche reveals that she gave the kids, Michael and Bridget, tickets to a show, and later that night they think they're still not back yet, but they find out that actually they arrived home quite a few hours earlier, and Rose goes to check on them, and we hear Rose making a noise, and the others, initially Dorothy and Blanche, go after her, and there we have Michael and Bridget naked in bed. Rose doesn't even realise they're naked to begin with. Her response is exactly what I expected from Rose. I do think Sophia was very harsh, and this is where we start to get really, really strong variety in the perspectives, because Sophia says, and I quote, "I'm ashamed to call you my grandson." I think that was so brutal and unnecessary. Rose is just completely shocked by the whole situation. Dorothy seems a bit angry, and Blanche is the only one who's talking a bit more sensibly. Because as she points out, they're adults. They haven't done anything wrong. They haven't done anything illegal. And Blanche is definitely the voice of reason, which doesn't happen that often. But on this occasion, I think it works quite well. But then we get a lot of bickering between Rose and Dorothy. And Rose kind of started it. And I love Rose, but I do not think she was right to say that Bridget is too good for Michael. She ended up calling him a loser, and Dorothy responded by calling Bridget a tramp, and there is just no need for any of this name calling. And they're obviously saying these things out of shock and hurt and anger and frustration, but these words are still going to hurt. And I think the only saving grace is that they said it to each other rather than directly to Michael and Bridget. We then have the following morning in the kitchen. Sophia comes in wearing, she's all in black. She's got a black veil on. She is in mourning for her grandson. There's a tiny continuity error here. When we first see her, she has what I think is the string from her glasses down her back. And then the camera switches to another character, and then it comes back to her, and it's gone. It's no longer down her back. And it's so obvious because I think it's silver. And it's just this large silver loop against the jet black costume. It's such a tiny, tiny thing. But it really irritated me. And eventually Dorothy and Michael have this heart-to-heart. And I think their conversation was very realistic. It was very honest. And I can imagine a conversation going like that in real life. And then Sophia comes along and very quickly she forgives Michael. Or at least she's willing to move on from it. And that's all fine. The conversation between Bridget and Rose is maybe not as easy, and I think that's largely because Rose is very uncomfortable by the whole situation. She thought this was Bridget's first time, and to find out that it wasn't, she's just getting a lot of information at once, and she's really struggling to deal with it. And as she points out, she's starting to have to think of Bridget as a whole new person, and by that, I assume she means that she's no longer thinking of Bridget as her little girl, but as a woman in her own right. And I guess that's going to be pretty difficult. And I really like the fact that everybody responded to this differently. Rose and Dorothy, although they're the parents of the two children in question, they had very different reactions. Sophia had a very extreme reaction. And I'm really surprised by that. Well, kind of am, kind of not. On the one hand, I feel like Sophia has a lot of worldly experience. And she's got a lot of stories to tell. And seeing this kind of thing should be like water off of a duck's back. But at the same time, I think she holds family values very strongly. And for her grandson to do something that probably wasn't the smartest decision, maybe her knee-jerk reaction does make sense. I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence with whether or not I think Sophia's reaction was expected. I'm not really sure. And Blanche, yeah, I think Blanche's reaction was perfect as well. And I also think Bridget and Michael had an interesting take. They didn't flip out that their parents were intervening. They didn't storm off because they were uncomfortable with the situation. But I have to remind myself that they're not young teenagers. They are, which is kind of the point, older adults and old enough to make their own decisions. I'm not 100% sure how old Bridget is. Because she was going off to university in England, I assumed that she was 18. But then if she lost her virginity 4 years ago, that would be kind of awkward. So maybe did they say she was going to university for a master's? Which means she would have been 16-ish, would have been a little bit more comfortable. I don't know, I might have missed it. If anybody can confirm how old Bridget is, please do let me know. But either way, the point still stands that they are adults. They're not 13, 14, 15-year-old teenagers. They're adults who can make their own decisions. And for some characters, that's easier to stomach than others. I thought it was a really good episode. Loads of great perspectives. A lot of really great points raised. Some nice comedy in there as well. Some uneasy things. Mostly the harsh words from Dorothy and Rose. But ultimately, I thought Family Affair was a pretty brilliant episode.